jump, followed by the navigator Dave, bombardier Joe, and pilot Jim, who burned his face during the bailing out. Young Ed was still on board and was in total panic. Eyewitnesses have seen somebody in the cockpit just before the bomber crashed. This means that Ed must have ran through the burning bomb bay to the cockpit. This is Boulder. You see the dikes around it. While the men were landing, the feathered Indian flew over Heinkesand, made a sharp turn and crashed into an orchard in the polder that you can see here. One part crashed into a pool called the Glasses. You can see it next to the yellow cloth, that's the form of the glasses. Another part crashed against the dike, and many other parts were spread over a large area. The family of resistance fighter Co and Pierre van der Steinen owned this piece of land, and Co wrote after the war, "We were busy, my brother and myself and a few farmhands, trying to get a horse out of the ditch. While we were doing our job, we saw an Allied aircraft shot and hit by flak near Ankerveren polder. The aircraft flew very low. It flew in a curve to the village Heinkesand and some straight at us, but hit the ground near at the pool. One of the engines of the aircraft came to a stop only 10 feet from us. The plane flew just 1 meter over the head of Mr. Wisse, who was cleaning a ditch along the Grote Dijk. He survived, but you could see at his face that it was the shock of his life." You can imagine that. These moments were quite huge. We also saw parachutes coming out of the plane, but could not determine how many there were, given the many poplar trees on the dike. The devastation was immense, and the debris of the were scattered over a large area. Just before a nursery for fruit trees and an orchard. Within a range of 200 meters, the apples hung white on the trees because of the heat. A large part of one of the wings was stopped by 2 large linden trees. Those trees caught fire by the intense heat, and 3 years after the crash, they still had to have no leaves growing on them. These silent witnesses of the crash are still there. Private Ed Jenscho died in the crash, and his heavily maimed and burned body was found in the cockpit. This is what was left of the bomber after the parts were piled up. The woman in the traditional dress is the wife of the resistance fighter Co van der Steinen. The 2 boys are his sons. Tail gunner Norman Hebert and waist gunner Ben were arrested immediately. They were brought by car to this town hall for questioning. Radio operator Elton and co-pilot Fred landed in the orchard. They were arrested too. Elton wrote, "When they finished searching us, one man that could speak English told us to line up over against a barn. We asked him what they were going to do, but none of them would say a word. Of course, we were pretty darn scared and could imagine most anything. But when they lined us against the barn, we figured we had it. The one soldier backed off a ways and took the safety of the machine pistol he was carrying. The co-pilot asked if they were going to kill us, and still they were silent. Boy, about that time we were really sweating. About the time that the Jerry's backed off a ways, a German officer came up the road and started yelling at the guys that were with us. He made us carry our chutes and started us towards the village. The village was about 2 miles from where we were. Elton and Fred were also taken to this same town hall. Waist gunner Lois landed near navigator Dave and pilot Jim in another orchard. Together they walked through a dry ditch until Lois realized that he still had his wallet in his pocket. He decided to bury it before the Germans could get the private information in his wallet. And when he stopped to do this, the other 2 walked on. Lois heard some shouting, and right at that time he hid under the bush and saw how his friends were arrested. He waited until dark and fled. After a while he found a haystack where he could hide to spend the night. Bombardier Joe landed on the other side of the dike where Lois, Dave and Jim had landed. He crashed into an apple tree in front of a farm and broke his ankle. He hobbled into a large barn, climbed 2 ladders, and hid himself in a small hayloft behind the small window that you can see on the top. It's very small window. He was lucky. A large unit of Germans that had been using the same barn to sleep in had left that morning, so no one saw him. That evening, another unit was built in there, so it was very dangerous situation for Joe. This is a photo of the same hayloft that I took 2 years ago. After so many years, nothing has changed. The bottles from which Joe drank and the cushion on which he sat were still there, after about 70 years of dust. So 2 men were dead, 6 were arrested, and 2 were hiding in the hay. 2 days after the crash, 2 coffins with the bodies of Ed and Jean were carried to the local cemetery by 8 resistance men, among them my grandfather. After the liberation of Zeeland, a good month later, resistance men placed one of the propellers on the graves of Ed and Jean. You can see it in the middle photo. You can see it on the photo on the inside. On special days, these graves were totally covered with flowers. In 1946, both bodies were reburied at American cemeteries, Ed in Luxembourg and Jean in Belgium. I have visited both their graves. Meanwhile, Joe was discovered by a farmhand. His boss knew that his farm was much too dangerous for his guests and notified the local resistance group. They decided that he had to be brought to the tree nursery of Co and Pier van der Steinen. On the last photo, they dressed up Joe up as a blacksmith assistant and put him on a bicycle. Because of his broken ankle, Joe had much difficulty to keep up, but he had no choice. Blacksmith, Nico van Biesen, was the one who had to bring Joe to the other farm. They had to cross a German checkpoint, but they succeeded to reach the nursery. Joe slept in the barn that you can see on the right, behind some hay bales. The next day, Nico and my grandfather brought Joe to the neighboring village, dressed up as a farmer. They had to cross 2 checkpoints, but my grandfather knew the German soldiers well, because they were billeted in his school. The soldiers were quite friendly to him and even saluted while they let the 3 sons pass. Nico and Pete brought Joe to the rectory, and Nico and Pete brought Joe to the rectory of Reverend André Evelijn and his family. You can see the family on this photo. After this first night in the hay, the next morning, Lois followed a farmhand that had been digging out potatoes. He followed this man to his house and asked for help. And luckily this man had lived in Canada for a few years and spoke English quite well. Kees Beck and his wife hid Lois for about 10 days in his barn. And Kees Beck worked for Co van der Steinen, and after that 10 days told his boss about his guest. Co and the resistance group decided to move Lois also to a safer place. First to the tree nursery and then to the rectory, where Lois and Joe were reunited. While they were staying there in a small room for about a month, the brothers Co and Pier brought the vicar's family extra food and clothes. My grandfather was appointed to be the translator for the group because he had studied English in Oxford, and he spent much time with the 2 airmen. He brought them English books for them to read. When he was stopped by a German soldier and asked why he was carrying so much English books, my grandfather told him that he was giving the vicar English lessons. Joe and Lois stayed in hiding until the area was liberated by Canadian troops on October 29th. This is a photo that was taken by the vicar on the same day, and Joe and Lois were liberated. You see Lois and Joe in civilian clothes, with some town people in the back, and a Canadian armed vehicle. They were brought to Belgium and from there to England and back home to the States. This is a photo of the liberation of Heinke Sand. On the far right you see my grandfather dressed up in a Canadian uniform, while the Canadian soldiers would wear traditional farmers' costumes. It was a large party. But while Joe and Lois could enjoy Christmas with their loved ones, their comrades who were arrested had to face a very harsh and bad time. After interrogation, they were brought to a train station in the city of Goes, where the officers were separated from the non-commissioned officers. The officers, Jim, Dave and Fred, were transported by train to Stalag Luft 1 in Germany, on the Baltic Sea. The non-commissioned officers, Elton, Ben and Norman, ended up in Stalag 4 in Poland. But first they were brought to the airfield Soesterberg, where they met a group of British soldiers who were taken prisoner during Operation Market Garden. Because the Germans thought Elton was a spy, he was separated from Ben and Norman, and together with the British he was transported elsewhere. This is Elton. Because Elton is the only one who had written about his time, we will follow his route. During the terrible transport, he hardly got anything to drink or eat. They first brought him to the army base in Ede, and they then by train to the notorious Kamp Vught, the only SS concentration camp in the Netherlands. He stayed there for about a week. The regular prisoners of the camp were already evacuated and or executed because of the advancing Allied forces. So it was only used as a transfer camp for prisoners of war right now. With another train, he was brought to the German city of Cologne, where he and his British fellow prisoners hardly survived an Allied bombing raid on the city. The next camp was the horrific concentration camp Bergen-Belsen. You might have heard about it. Where he saw the corpses that were piled up and the starving walking dead in striped clothes. After hardly surviving the next camps, he got to his destination, Stalag Luft 4 in Poland. Ben and Norman also ended up in the same camp, but Elton has not written about meeting them. Perhaps this was because the camp was divided in 4 sections, as you can see here, that were not in contact with each other. Life in the camp was very harsh, with a merciless regime, fairly little to eat or drink, and not much to do. In February 1945, Hitler decided to move all prisoners of war back to Germany because the Russian army was advancing from the east. The notorious Black March began. Elton and prisoners from many other camps in Poland had to march to the west through ice and snow and an endless column of weakened, starving men. They almost didn't get any food, stayed in old pig barns, and were shot when they were too weak to go on. Hundreds of men have died during this march. Elton teamed up with a friend called Dries, and after 2 months of marching, they were almost shot for stealing oats from a horse. And after that, they decided to escape. While the column was marching through a forest, Elton, Dries, and a few others began to run into the woods while the bullets flew over their heads. Navigating on the stars, they walked westwards and found the British troops. You see, the black is the Black March, and the blue is when they were liberated. During almost 3 months of the Black March, from the 6,000 prisoners of war that had left Stalag Luft 4, 1,500 didn't survive. This is the total route of Elton, as you can see here. Just before Elton died of old age, he had written down everything that he could remember about the mission, about the crash, about his arrest and his transport to Stalag 4, and also about the Black March. His impressive and very detailed story is included in our book. By the time Elton found the British troops, The officers of Stalag Luft 1 were liberated by Russians on horseback. They brought some lady dancers with them to entertain the ex-prisoners of war. You can see them. And also brought cattle for them to slaughter. They were very hungry, of course. Here you see the liberated men watching the performance. And all the prisoners of war were brought to France and from there back home. After the liberation, Joseph was stationed in Germany, and during his leave, he visited my grandfather several times. After the war, my grandfather stayed in contact with Joe for quite some years after the war. This is a photo of Joe visiting my grandparents. The boy in the middle is my father. On the lawn, you can see one of the propellers of the Fed Indian. In 1966, my grandfather visited Joe in the US. Their friendship faded over the years. But 2 years ago, I met Joe's son John when he visited the Netherlands. A week before his visit, I also had met Lois Eli's daughter Tina. And twice that month, I organized a special day for them. First, they met the sons and daughters of the men that helped their fathers. And with this whole large group, we did a large tour, visiting all the hiding places and important sites. This is John Sarkowski, the son of Joe Sarkowski, in the red shirt with the family members of his father's helpers. And this is John in the small room in the rectory where his father and Lois were hiding. This is Tina Ely with the second generation. Here Tina is unveiling an information panel that I have designed for the Liberation Museum in Zeeland. It stands before a propeller and 2 guns of the feathered Indian. Several parts of the bomber survived. This is an old photo of the nursery of Pueblo. And you can see 2 propellers, one there, one there, 3 guns, a munition belt hanging over the guns, and a wheel rim. These are the propellers and 2 guns from the Liberation Museum. This is me. Within the bag, in the flower bag, you can see a propeller that my grandfather placed in his lawn. Third propeller can be seen at the airport Midden-Zeeland. And here John Sarkowski is admiring the propeller. In October 2010, I organized a search for remaining parts of the bomber at the crash site. With the help of a museum and other people, we searched the area with metal detectors, as you can see here. Yeah. In an old army tent, I have had interviews with several family members of the resistance men. This is me with the son of Nico van Wiesen. We had found a rusty .50 machine gun, as you can see here, with our metal detectors. We were very glad to find it. And also a munition bed, lots of .50 ammunition, and large parts of engine parts. These are small parts of the aircraft, as you can see here. The patch was given by Joe Sarkowski to my grandfather, and I got the Crusaders memorial coin from Bob Haber. Last December, my book was finally published in the Netherlands. I sent copies of my book to several family members of the American crew, and of course they couldn't read the Dutch text. But together with Bob Hayward, the nephew of Till Gunnar Norman, I have made a translation that I've sent by email to all the families. And one day I hope to publish my book in English too. So if you know a good publisher, tell me. After all, for a large part, this is a story about an American crew. That's why I want to also have it in English. I'm very pleased to visit the US with my family right now. And last week I had the pleasure to visit the family of Tina Ely, the daughter of Lois Ely in Wyoming, and now Michelle and Bob, daughter and nephew of Norman Hayward in Colorado. What I've told you is just a very small fraction of the whole story that's in my book. Over 600 Allied aircraft crashed in Zeeland. And although I can't write about all of them, I hope to honor them all with telling about this just one. Next year, on September 18th, it will be 70 years ago that the Fed England crashed. 70 years ago that 2 young airmen died. And 70 years ago that the lives of 8 other crew members were altered for the rest of their lives. My research was never just about writing a book, but also about honoring my grandfather and his group and those brave American airmen that risked their lives for over a foreign continent. Thank you for listening. And I'd like to hand a copy of my book to the museum. And after that you can ask questions if you want.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. In fact, if you present the book, this is our president over here, Don Blim, and he would like to receive it from you and say a few words.
Thank you. I'm stunned by that story, aren't you? Yeah, very much. I mean, that's just incredible. Thank you so much for the work you did to put this story together. We're going to be very proud to display this book here at the museum. And we wanted to give you something. At least put this in your library. This is a history of this Army Air Base.
Oh wow!
And this book is assembled and written by Dr. Ray Sisson, who for many years here was our historian, and he was head of the engineering department here at the university. And he only recently has pretty much retired from this museum, but we will always remember Ray Sisson. So
okay.
we're glad to present that with you.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Do you have any questions?
If we could ask Don to stand back up, we have a couple more presentations we'd like to do.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Don, would you
Sure.
mind standing up? Can you do that? All right.
I can hold you up.
Yeah.
I must say I've also brought some artifacts from photos, only original photo documents, and I will show you them also.
Right.
Stand next to Don.
Oh.
I will stand this way.
I have to tell you, when I first met Fred, he was my point of contact to set up the presentation plan. And he came through the museum door, dressed in a flight suit, driving his little Mercedes convertible. And I have to admit, I'm guilty of profiling. Firepower. I knew it. And sure enough, if you see the pedestal out there in the divided highway, there's an F-84 out there, and that's what Fred used to fly. But to honor this day, because this was the place where the crew came together. This is where the crew learned how to function as a system, to fly that aircraft, be able to be deployed, engage in war. It's kind of interesting that it's almost 70 years after the war. And my cousin, her father was a tail gunner, and here's my uncle, Mark, is the grandson of a resistance movement. And we're still engaged after 70 years, so that's pretty remarkable. What we'd like to donate to the museum is artifacts from Michelle's dad, his medals that he had earned during the war, including Purple Heart. And go ahead.
I think it's just appropriate, this comes here and makes a complete circle. I want my dad try to change it.
Thank you. We're going to be very proud to have this here in the museum. We're going to be very proud. Look at that, we have the real medals.
That's good.
started out, they all had enlisted aircrew wings, and as they got more proficient, of course, the presidents changed. And so those are actual sterling silver area gun.
May I pass this around?
Sure.
We'll have to put this in a prominent place here in our museum. But again, thank you.
So this other presentation we have is something we hope will trigger some questions, because we wanted to make sure the museum had a picture of the crew that was formed here. And what we've done is put a little insert of Mark's book cover. So as you display the book cover and you see this, and people ask, then you can assign Fred here to interpret, what's here in the Dutch. So we'd like to present that because this is a crew that formed here at the Pueblo Air Base.
Very well. All right. I'm sure that our docents are going to be real happy to try to tell this story. We'll never be able to tell it like this, but thank you. All right, we'll pass this around too. Thank you again. That's just an incredible story.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That was great.
Wonderful.
Well, I want you all to know how old Dutch people still appreciate the great job that the 8th Air Force and all of the United States Air Forces and their pilots and crews did for Holland and for all of the liberation under the Germans' occupation. It was a terrible life for 5 years, and many of us did not survive. In fact, I lost an American cousin of mine in the Battle of the Bulge, the second day. He was a member of the Tank Destroyer Battalion, and no doubt he was chased by the German tanks, which unfortunately were better than ours. And probably it took one shot of an 88 to eliminate his tank. And his mother in Albany, New York, asked us to go to the grave administration in Germany and arrange for his transfer from an American cemetery to a cemetery in my hometown, a regular civilian cemetery. So his name was Jasper Vandenberg. And we asked the Dutch Navy at the time of the funeral to be the honor guard during the funeral. So 2 American fellows drove in a van to deliver his body in the casket, and we buried him in Holland. And that happened when he died was the 17th of December, 1945. And a month later or so, my second brother, who was 27, he died as a result of an attack on a German train. At that time, Spitfires 51s were roaming all of Holland because it was still occupied, the northern part, by the Germans. So they flew at 500 feet to look for targets. And when they found that German train, my brother was waiting in that same town for the train to pass. But he caught a slug in the neck, and he bled to death, unfortunately. His daughter was born April 19, 1945. Just recently I visited with her. She lives in Germany. But anyway, that's what happened. During the latter part of the war, the Allies did not really see who all were on the road. I myself got strafed by 2 Spitfires. And I was already in a hole on the ground because I knew what was happening. But the driver of a truck from The Hague, a garbage truck, jumped out and he was trying to join me in the hole where I was. Well, he got halfway before he collapsed from the bullets in his body. And so it happened all over the country. Besides that, I must mention also how many people were shot just alongside the road by the Germans. If one German was injured or killed by the underground people, they would take 10 times the number of people that were killed by the underground forces. In fact, one time, close to Arnhem, they shot a German general, and they took 150 people, Dutch people, totally innocent, and they mowed them down by machine guns, and they let them lay there. And things like that were happening all over. The Germans were very cruel, and all they had to do was make a call to Berlin and ask Adolf, what should we do with those people? What do you think he would say? Shoot them tomorrow morning. That used to be his answer for totally innocent people. But anyway, I won't bore you anymore with any stories like that. But it was a tough life for 5 years. So, and that's why we appreciated the tremendous amount, even in this country, went on where people build airplanes, build tanks and ships to liberate all the people that were being occupied and being under pressure all the time, having to hide. No lights, no food. The last year, there was no electric power. So, it was not a great time to live. But we were liberated, thank God. God bless you. You know, thanks for my hat. Hey, Mark, appreciate the hat from Holland. And this is a hat to remind us of a 100-year military aviation. And in 1953, I was in my F-84 with about another 72 F-84s flying over Holland, showing off our airplanes. So now I show off my hat.
Thank you, Fred. This is Fred Zeeland. We have to thank him. What other purpose do we have as a museum than to try to preserve some of this history? It gives us all the more reason for the time that we volunteer here and try to do our part, whatever it is, to try to preserve this history and get our young people coming along. I raised 3 sons, and I made really sure that they understood what World War II was about. And my father was a medic in the Pacific, helped bury 10,000 of his buddies, he told me. And it's just incredible history, and it's just amazing that we speak the language we do today. Thank you, Brett.